William Jones glanced at the antique timepiece on his mantelpiece. The hands precisely aligned at 8 o'clock, the hour marking his nightly ritual, a solitary dram of amber liquid, savored in the worn leather armchair before the crackling hearth. A decade. 10 years of quiet solitude. 10 years since the gnawing fear had finally relinquished its icy grip. 10 years since he'd laid Jasmine to rest, unceremoniously, in a desolate patch of land beyond the city limits. The sprawling suburban Portland house, though outwardly opulent, felt hollow, a mausoleum to a life lived in shadows. The scent of old wood and pipe tobacco clung to the heavy drapes, a stark contrast to the sterile, antiseptic smell of the detective's office, a place William had become intimately familiar with. Following Jasmine's disappearance, he'd liquidated their cramped city apartment, purchasing this sanctuary, a fresh start, devoid of haunting memories. No lingering specters of that fateful night, the whispered threat of divorce, the chilling pressure of his hands. The official investigation had concluded inconclusively after a year, leaving a bitter taste behind. Detective Tom Brown, though unable to substantiate his suspicions, continued to fix William with a look of simmering animosity during their infrequent encounters. The absence of a body remained a gnawing uncertainty. The silence of the house pressed in on him, a heavy blanket stifling any hope of peace. Would he ever escape the shadow of that night? William swirled the whiskey in his glass, the amber liquid catching the firelight. The mahogany gleamed, reflecting the prosperity he'd meticulously cultivated. His investment firm flourished, he was a pillar of the community, lauded for his philanthropy, a paragon of success. Yet behind the meticulously crafted facade of respectability, a chilling secret festered, a truth buried deep beneath the polished veneer of his new life. The brutal reality of Jasmine's death remained a phantom, a constant companion in the quiet solitude of his luxurious home, its opulence a stark contrast to the squalor of his guilt. The sudden, jarring peal of the doorbell sliced through the tense silence, an unwelcome interruption. William, uncharacteristically unprepared for a visitor, hadn't anticipated a late-night call. He assumed it to be merely a delayed package, a mundane distraction. Placing his untouched glass on the ornately carved table, he approached the imposing oak door, opening it without the precaution of checking the peephole. The world tilted on its axis. Jasmine stood on his doorstep, her spectral presence materialized before him. His wife, the woman he'd murdered 10 years prior, materialized before him, a ghostly apparition from a past he thought forever buried. A wave of nausea washed over William, his legs threatened to buckle beneath him, his head swimming in a cacophony of disorienting sounds. The color seemed to drain from his face, leaving him pale and weak. "Hello, William," she breathed, her voice a chilling echo of his nightmares, a haunting melody from a past he desperately tried to silence. The air crackled with an unspoken threat, a chilling anticipation of the unimaginable. "What delayed your response?" Jasmine's presence was unnervingly familiar. She stood exactly as she had on that fateful night, a decade ago. The same cascade of chestnut hair, the same vibrant emerald eyes, even the tiny beauty mark nestled at the corner of her lips remained unchanged. Yet, subtle alterations were present, etched lines etched by time, streaks of silver weaving through her rich brown hair, a testament to the passage of years. But it was impossible. A decade had transpired. She shouldn't exist. William remained speechless, rooted to the spot, his mind reeling. "Might I come in?" Jasmine's query was laced with gentle insistence, a familiar smile gracing her lips. "It's rather chilly out here." Without a moment's hesitation, she bypassed him, entering his house as if it were her own. The familiar rhythm of her movements, the easy grace of her gestures, it was as if years hadn't passed. She discarded her coat, hanging it on the antique coat rack, the very rack from their old apartment, a poignant reminder of the past. "You've redecorated," she observed, her gaze sweeping across the spacious living room. "It's quite lovely, although I'd suggest repositioning the sofa against the opposite wall." William remained immobile, pressed against the cool wall, paralyzed by disbelief. The sheer impossibility of the situation sent a jolt of icy fear through him. This wasn't real, he told himself, this had to be a cruel fabrication of his mind, some form of delusion spawned from guilt and grief. It was a nightmare, a hallucination, a cruel trick of the mind. She couldn't be there, and yet, there she was. He braced himself, preparing for whatever might come next, the weight of the impossible pressing down on him. Your presence here, it's impossible, William finally managed, his voice a strained whisper. Jasmine turned, her expression a mixture of surprise and bewilderment. Why ever not? I mentioned I'd return this evening. I apologize for the delay, the traffic was rather congested. William stumbled, grasping the sturdy oak doorframe for support. The blood drained from his face as he spoke. You're deceased. It's been a decade. A melodic laugh filled the room, the sound exactly as he remembered, familiar, comforting, and terrifying all at once. William, what utter nonsense are you spouting? I had a doctor's appointment this morning, you drove me yourself, surely you recall? She advanced toward him, her proximity intensifying the surreal quality of the encounter. Are you feeling unwell? You appear rather pale. The familiar scent of Dior, her signature perfume, wafted towards him, a cruel reminder of the past. You can't be here, he repeated, his steps retracing themselves, a desperate attempt to put distance between them. I buried you. Jasmine's brow furrowed, concern replacing her previous amusement. She gently placed her hand on his forehead. Do you have a fever? You might be coming down with something. Allow me to prepare some tea. With a disconcerting familiarity, she moved towards the kitchen, navigating the unfamiliar layout with effortless ease. William followed, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. This had to be a dream, a fantastical fabrication of his subconscious, a waking nightmare from which he would soon awaken. He closed his eyes, desperately willing it to end, but remained rooted to this cruel, impossible reality. The tea kettle whistled, the sound sharp and jarring in the midst of his growing horror. He wasn't waking up. Not yet. Jasmine opened the kitchen cabinet, her hand reaching for the familiar mugs with practiced ease. Their placement was precisely where William remembered them. She flicked on the kettle, the familiar whirring a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within him. Turning to him, she voiced her concern. William, you seem rather unlike yourself today. Has something untoward occurred at work? William's eyes remained fixated on her, refusing to believe what he was witnessing. The night of her death played out in his mind, her announcement of leaving him, their escalating argument, the chilling pressure of his hands, the dimming of her eyes. He recalled wrapping her lifeless form in a rug, driving her to that desolate location, the agonizing effort of digging her grave in the frozen earth. Your presence here is impossible, he repeated, the third iteration of the phrase underscored by the rising bile in his throat. Jasmine approached, extending a hand towards him, her touch surprisingly warm and alive. William, you're alarming me. Perhaps we should summon a physician? He recoiled, wrenching his hand away, his body pressed against the wall. Panic clawed at his throat, constricting his ability to breathe. Who are you? He demanded, his voice tight with fear. You cannot be Jasmine. Jasmine is dead. The woman before him sighed, shaking her head, a flicker of irritation replacing her earlier concern. William, she began, her tone laced with a hint of exasperation. This charade must cease. It's hardly amusing. The air hung heavy with unspoken implications, a looming question mark hanging over the very fabric of reality. The chilling possibility that he might be losing his mind loomed, a terrifying prospect far more menacing than any supernatural explanation. I'm exhausted from my medical consultation, and you're engaging in some rather peculiar behavior, Jasmine stated, her voice tinged with weariness. The kettle's shrill whistle announced the boiling water. She turned to prepare the tea, her movements mirroring those of Jasmine with unnerving precision, the way she grasped the cup, the identical 2 spoonfuls of sugar, the familiar clockwise stirring. Let's sit, she offered, extending the steaming mug to him. You're clearly not yourself. William accepted the cup, the scalding porcelain burning his fingertips. The searing heat confirmed the stark reality of his situation. This was not a dream. Every detail, every sensation was piercingly real. How is this possible? He breathed, his voice barely a whisper. What is the matter? She inquired, settling into the chair opposite him. William, you're frightening me. What troubles you? He placed the untouched mug on the table, the silence between them heavy with unspoken dread. It's been a decade, he stated, the words catching in his throat. The year is 2025. Surprise flickered across her face, but it was fleeting, quickly replaced by a gentle smile laced with concern. William, you're mistaken. The year is 2015. Today's date is March 28th. I was at Dr. Her words trailed off, her expression shifting to one of guarded apprehension. A subtle change had occurred, the warmth in her eyes had dimmed. The comfortable familiarity that had permeated her demeanor had vanished, replaced by a chilling sense of uncertainty. Her gaze drifted toward the windows, the daylight fading outside. A knot of dread tightened in William's stomach. What did this mean? What was really happening? The impossible had occurred, but what came next? William shook his head, his thoughts a chaotic jumble. That's impossible. A decade has passed. You're deceased. Why do you persist in this delusion? A hint of impatience colored Jasmine's voice. I'm very much alive, William. I'm standing before you. He stared, his mind struggling to reconcile the conflicting realities. Had he truly lost his sanity? Had the past 10 years been nothing but a figment of his imagination? Or, had he mistakenly buried someone else? No, the image of Jasmine's face was seared into his memory. I can offer proof, he declared, abruptly rising from his chair. I'll demonstrate. He hurried to his study, returning with a laptop. He powered it up, accessed his files, and displayed the current date. Observe, he said, pointing to the screen. March 28, 2025. 10 years have transpired, Jasmine. She glanced at the screen, then back at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and pity. William, I don't understand what manipulations you've performed on this device, but is this some form of jest, or are you unwell? He closed the laptop, his head shaking in disbelief. This is no jest. And I assure you, I'm not ill. Your presence here defies all logic. It's impossible. The weight of the impossible pressed down on him, a suffocating blanket of disbelief. The certainty of her death, the vivid memory of her burial, battled with the undeniable reality of her presence. He was trapped in a paradox, a terrifying labyrinth of conflicting realities. What was true? What was false? The answers eluded him, leaving him adrift in a sea of bewilderment. He gripped the edges of the table, his knuckles white. He had to unravel this mystery before it consumed him. But how? You perished 10 years ago, he stammered, the near confession of murder hanging heavy in the air. What, William? She questioned, tilting her head, her expression unreadable. What did you do? He recoiled, the room threatening to spin out of control. Nothing, he managed, his voice barely audible. Indeed, I'm quite uncertain what's transpiring, she responded, her voice laced with genuine confusion. She rose, approaching him, her hands resting lightly on his shoulders. William, you require rest. Come, I'll accompany you to the bedchamber. Taking his hand, she guided him upstairs. He followed, his mind adrift, his body acting out of instinct rather than conscious thought. She was navigating the house with an uncanny familiarity, guiding him to the master bedroom, a room he hadn't shared with anyone since her supposed death. She flicked on the bedside lamp, her movements graceful and effortless as she began to smooth the sheets. William remained rooted to the doorway, his eyes tracking her every move. How did you know the location of the bedroom? He asked, the question escaping before he could filter it. She turned, a gentle smile gracing her lips. What a curious question. We've resided here for 5 years. Panic surged within him, tightening its icy grip around his throat. No, he corrected, his voice strained. I acquired this house a year after your disappearance. You were never here. Jasmine sighed, settling onto the edge of the bed, her expression shifting to one of profound sadness. The weight of his denial hung heavy in the air, the growing chasm between their perceptions widening with each passing second. The impossible reality of her existence gnawed at his sanity, leaving him trapped in a nightmare from which he could not awaken. The clock ticked, each second a hammer blow against the fragile remnants of his reality. William shook his head, speechless, his mind a tempest of conflicting thoughts. What is happening? Am I losing my mind? Or is this some elaborate deception? But who could possibly know? Who could fathom that I'd ended Jasmine's life? Rest now, Jasmine said softly, her voice a soothing balm against his mounting terror. Sleep is needed. All will be resolved by morning's light. He moved slowly towards the bed, collapsing onto it beside her. Her scent, the familiar perfume, was unmistakably real. Oh, Jasmine, he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. If this is truly you, please forgive me. A gentle smile graced her lips as she stroked his cheek. For what, my dear? All is well. Now, lie down and rest. She rose, offering him space. William lay down fully clothed, the fabric cool against his skin. He knew sleep would be elusive, but exhaustion and the numbing shock did their work, pulling him under. It was a restless sleep, haunted by fleeting images and unsettling sounds. When William awoke, the morning light illuminated an empty bed. The room was still, silent, save for the faint whisper of the wind outside. The lingering scent of her perfume was the only tangible proof of her presence, the rest remained a chilling question mark hanging over the edge of his reality. Was it a dream, a hallucination, or something far more disturbing? The uncertainty was a burden far heavier than any physical exhaustion. William sat bolt upright, his eyes scanning the room. Could it have been merely a dream? Perhaps last night's events were nothing more than a figment of my imagination. But then, sounds from the kitchen reached his ears, the delicate clinking of dishes, the soft rhythm of footsteps. He rose slowly, his movements cautious as he descended the stairs. Jasmine stood at the stove, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. She turned as he entered the kitchen, a gentle smile gracing her lips. Good morning, she greeted him warmly. How do you feel? William stared at her, a chilling wave of fear washing over him, a fear far deeper and more pervasive than he'd ever known. This third day of Jasmine's inexplicable presence had transformed his life into a living nightmare. Each morning he awoke, praying for the solace of a dream, only to find her there, preparing breakfast, inquiring about his plans for the day, as if the past decade had never transpired. As if he hadn't ended her life on that frigid March night. He sat at the kitchen table, his gaze fixated on her as she washed the dishes. The familiar rhythm of her movements, her practiced motions were exactly as he remembered. Every detail of her mannerisms echoed the past that now felt unreal, and yet uncannily, disturbingly real. The weight of his actions, the crushing burden of his guilt, pressed in on him, a suffocating presence as real as her spectral existence in his home. The impossible was not merely present, it was encroaching, consuming him in ways that words could not convey. He remained at the table, observing Jasmine with increasing dread. The comforting normalcy she projected felt utterly terrifying. What would come next? First the glasses, then the plates, then the cutlery, each action executed with practiced ease. She wiped her hands on the familiar kitchen towel, the motion as familiar as breathing. You're staring again, she commented, her voice calm, without turning. Is something amiss? William flinched. Even this, her awareness of his gaze, was unnervingly familiar, a chilling echo of Jasmine. Everything's fine, he replied, his voice strained. She turned, her smile failing to reach her eyes. William, you've been behaving oddly since that night. Perhaps a consultation with a physician is in order? No, he responded sharply, his tone brusque. A physician is unnecessary. The thought of confessing his predicament to a doctor, the inevitable questions about his wife's death while she stood before him, sent a shiver down his spine. The consequences, confinement in a mental institution, or worse, a jail cell, loomed large. Very well, she conceded, her shoulders lifting in a slight shrug. As you wish, but I'm genuinely concerned for your well-being. A tightening sensation gripped William's chest. The genuine concern in her voice was exactly the way Jasmine would have expressed worry. The familiar pattern, the impossible reality, was crushing him under its weight. The delicate balance of his mind was cracking. This wasn't just a ghostly apparition, this was a nightmare that was slowly consuming him. And it was her. There was no escaping this. The weight of it all was almost unbearable. Even during the final months of their fractured marriage, when his anger had begun to manifest physically, her concern for his well-being had never wavered. It had infuriated him then, now, it sent a fresh wave of disorienting emotions through him. His train of thought was interrupted by the insistent trill of his phone. He retrieved his cell phone, the caller ID displaying Mike, his business partner. "I must take this call," William announced, rising from his chair. "Certainly," Jasmine replied calmly. "I shall ascend and attend to some personal matters." William moved to the living room to take the call. "Hello, Mike." "William, where are you?" "We were scheduled to meet at 10 o'clock. It's nearly 11. William glanced at his watch. The meeting had completely slipped his mind. "My apologies, I was delayed at home. A family matter arose." Mike chuckled. "Family? When did you acquire a family?" "A slip of the tongue. A domestic issue, let's say." "I'll be there shortly." "Right. The client has agreed to a 30-minute extension. Try to be prompt." William terminated the call, his gaze drifting toward the staircase. The casual conversation, the seemingly normal exchange, contrasted sharply with the surreal reality of his situation. The fact that he had almost confessed to having a wife added to the rising panic. He felt a profound sense of dread. He needed to leave the house, to find a way to resolve this nightmare, or at the very least to maintain his sanity amidst the escalating impossibility of it all. The simple act of leaving the house, a routine action, felt like a monumental task. He needed to think, to plan his next move carefully. He paused, taking a deep breath. He needed a moment to gather his thoughts and prepare himself for whatever lay ahead. The silence of the house seemed to press in on him. "Jasmine," he called out, his voice echoing through the house. "I must depart immediately for a business meeting, I'd forgotten." Silence reigned from the upper floor. He ascended the staircase rapidly, peering into the bedroom. It was vacant. The bathroom was likewise empty. He checked each room upstairs, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "Jasmine," he called again, his voice strained. Silence. He searched the entire ground floor, even venturing into the basement. She was nowhere to be found. A cold sweat broke out on his back, a chilling wave of dread washed over him. Where could she have vanished? Was she even here at all? Was this all a fabrication of my deranged mind? He stepped outside, his gaze sweeping across the yard, then the garage. There was no sign of Jasmine. Then, it struck him, a desperate attempt to confirm or deny the impossible reality. He pulled out his phone, accessing the photos he'd taken over the last 3 days. He found them, images of Jasmine, captured when she was out of his direct line of sight, in the morning sun in the garden, preparing dinner, engrossed in a book in the living room. But as he scrolled through his gallery, horror seized him, freezing him to the spot. The photos, once a source of potential proof, were now a chilling confirmation of a terrifying reality he could no longer deny. What he saw shattered any remaining vestiges of his sanity. The pictures weren't simply proof, they were evidence of something far more disturbing and deeply unsettling. The implications were far too terrifying to contemplate. His mind reeled from the shock. He stumbled back, pressing his hand against the wall for support as the true nature of his predicament dawned on him. It was far worse than he could have ever imagined. In every photograph where Jasmine should have been, there was only a blurred anomaly, a void where her presence should have been. It was as though someone had deliberately obscured her image. "Impossible," he whispered, his fingers trembling as he scrolled through the pictures. His contemplation was interrupted by another call from Mike. William took a deep breath, attempting to regain his composure. Yes, Mike, I'm en route. Please expedite the meeting and bring the Greenwood project files, you collected them yesterday. William nodded, although Mike couldn't see him. I'll arrive within 20 minutes. He returned to the house, retrieving the file from his study, and departed. Perhaps Jasmine's disappearance was a blessing in disguise. I require time to process this, to comprehend what's unfolding. The day unfolded in a haze, a surreal blur. William performed his work mechanically, responding to queries, signing documents, yet his thoughts persistently returned to Jasmine, her words at breakfast, her sudden disappearance, the unsettling alteration of the photographs. The images haunted him, the blurred spots a constant reminder of the unfathomable events. He felt a deep sense of unease and disorientation, as if his entire life were built on shifting sands. He tried to concentrate on his work but kept being pulled back to the disturbing puzzle of Jasmine's vanishing. He realized he couldn't continue on with business as usual, not while the impossible was still unresolved. He tried to focus on his work, but his mind was racing, struggling to process the events of the past few days. The weight of the unresolved mystery pressed down on him, heavy and oppressive. Each task felt monumental, each moment stretching into an eternity. He needed answers, and he needed them soon. Upon returning home that evening, William found the house silent and dark, devoid of Jasmine's presence. A wave of relief washed over him. Perhaps it was all over. Perhaps it was merely a mental breakdown, a hallucination induced by stress and guilt. He poured himself a whiskey, settling into his armchair before the fireplace. The familiar ritual offered a momentary respite. He raised the glass to his lips, closing his eyes. A challenging day? The sound of Jasmine's voice shattered the fragile peace. He jumped, nearly spilling his drink. She stood in the doorway of the living room, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Where have you been?" he demanded, striving to conceal the tremor in his voice. "Where?" "Here, naturally. Tidying up, organizing a few things. Didn't you notice the cleaner bathroom?" William shook his head. "I called for you before my departure. You were nowhere to be found." Jasmine's brow furrowed. "You must not have searched thoroughly." "I was in the dressing room, organizing my winter garments." She approached, her proximity intensifying the surreal quality of the situation. "William, what is happening? You're behaving strangely." The casual concern in her voice was unsettling. This wasn't some malevolent ghost, but a seemingly ordinary woman who had inexplicably returned from the grave. The horror of it pressed down on him. This wasn't just a matter of his sanity, this was a fight for his very soul. He could see the reality cracking around him. He needed to find a way out, a way to make sense of this, but where would he even begin? The questions swirled in his head, a dizzying vortex that threatened to consume him. He had to find an answer, but what if there wasn't one? "You're behaving rather strangely," Jasmine stated, her voice laced with concern. He set his glass down, retrieving his phone. "I wish to show you something." He opened his photo gallery, extending the device towards her. "These are photographs I've taken over the past few days. You should be present in these images, yet you're not. How do you account for that?" Jasmine accepted the phone, studying the pictures. "William, I don't understand what you mean. I'm clearly visible in each photograph." She returned the phone, and William stared in disbelief. Jasmine was indeed present in every image, exactly where he'd captured her, no blurs, no voids. "Impossible," he breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "I distinctly recall only blurred anomalies." Jasmine gently placed her hand on his shoulder. "William, please confide in me. What troubles you? You're alarming me." He looked at her, so undeniably real, so vibrant and alive, and a primal urge to confirm her tangible presence overwhelmed him. He pulled her close, embracing her tightly, the intensity of the hug bordering on painful. She was warm, her heartbeat a tangible rhythm against his chest. She was real, she was alive. The relief that washed over him was immense, but that was accompanied by a deeper confusion and horror. The impossible had happened. But how? What had caused this reality to fracture? He had to find an explanation, an answer, but where did he even begin? The sheer enormity of the event pressed in on him, suffocating him under the weight of the unbelievable. He needed answers and needed them soon. This reality was far more dangerous than anything he could have ever conceived. He clung to her, as if holding on to the last lifeline he had left. The next move had to be meticulously planned. "I apologize," he whispered, releasing her. "I'm unsure what possessed me." Jasmine studied him intently. "It's quite all right. Please, confide in me if any distress remains." She kissed his cheek, returning to the kitchen. William remained seated, the warmth of her touch lingering on his skin. Could this be the genuine Jasmine? Perhaps I didn't end her life that night after all. But the memories resurfaced, her lifeless body, the vacant stare, the agonizing effort of digging her grave in the frozen earth, the chilling weight of her body as he lowered it into the hole. He shook his head, resolutely pushing the memories aside, following her into the kitchen. Dinner passed in near silence. William observed her every movement, searching for any discrepancy, any sign of deception. But she was a flawless replica of Jasmine, from the way she held her fork to the seemingly insignificant mannerism of tucking her hair behind her ear. The unsettling perfection of it all was driving him to the brink of madness. This couldn't be real. Could it? The question swirled in his head, a vortex of doubt and disbelief, threatening to consume him. He tried to concentrate on eating, but every gesture, every word felt charged with a terrifying significance. The reality felt as if it were constantly shifting and slipping. He gripped his fork tightly, steeling himself for whatever might come next. Following dinner, they settled in to watch television. Jasmine had selected a film, the very same movie they'd begun watching the week before her disappearance. A chill snaked down William's spine. How could she know? Why that specific film? He inquired, striving to maintain a casual tone. Wasn't that the last movie we viewed together? She pondered for a moment. I believe we didn't quite finish it. William nodded, his silence heavy with unspoken implications. They hadn't finished it because their viewing had been interrupted by an argument, the argument that had ended Jasmine's life. As the film played, the doorbell's insistent peal sliced through the tense silence. William flinched, glancing at Jasmine. "Are you expecting a visitor?" he asked. "No," she replied, shaking her head. "Are you?" William rose, approaching the door. Detective Tom Brown stood on the threshold, his gaze fixed on William with the same disdain William remembered from their encounters during the investigation a decade prior. "Good evening, Mr. Jones," he said, his voice laced with an undercurrent of animosity. "May I enter?" "What is the purpose of your visit, Detective?" William asked, remaining where he was. "A routine inspection," Brown replied, his tone devoid of warmth. The casual phrasing barely masked the underlying purpose of the visit. William felt a cold dread envelop him. This couldn't be merely coincidental. Brown's appearance, on this particular night, with Jasmine present, felt far too orchestrated to be chance. The implications were terrifying. His carefully constructed world, already teetering on the brink of collapse, was about to shatter entirely. The detective's presence signaled the beginning of the end. The game had changed, and the stakes were higher than ever before. He steeled himself, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. "We conduct periodic check-ins with individuals connected to unresolved cases," Brown stated, his words a thinly veiled lie. William knew this was a fabrication. In the decade since Jasmine's disappearance, Brown had never once made a routine visit. Nevertheless, he stepped aside, allowing the detective entry. "Please, enter," he said. "However, I'm not alone." Brown entered, his eyes scanning the room. "Ah, yes. You have company." William turned towards the living room. The sofa was empty. The movie continued to play, but Jasmine was nowhere in sight. She was here moments ago, William said, panic threatening to overwhelm him. A friend, you say? Brown hummed thoughtfully. Perhaps she's reluctant to engage with law enforcement. Some individuals become apprehensive in our presence, particularly those harboring secrets. I don't perceive where she could have vanished. William started towards the stairs. Jasmine, he called, his caution momentarily forgotten. Brown's body tensed. Jasmine? Did you say Jasmine? William froze, realizing his slip. Ah, yes. That's the name of an acquaintance. A rather intriguing coincidence, Brown remarked, his gaze sharp, his expression one of thinly veiled suspicion. The game had begun, the detective's presence was not coincidental. It was a calculated move, signaling the beginning of the end. William knew he had to tread carefully, every word, every action carrying a weight that could irrevocably alter his fate. The line between reality and hallucination had blurred, and the consequences of his choices were now terrifyingly real. The weight of his secrets pressed down on him, heavy and oppressive, threatening to crush him under the weight of the inevitable. He needed to think, to plan. This was a battle for survival, a fight against the unrelenting force of the impossible. Considering the circumstances. Brown's words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. A cold sweat slicked William's back. What is the nature of your visit, detective? It's been a long day, and I wish to rest. Brown nodded slowly, showing no inclination to depart. Have you observed anything unusual recently, Mr. Jones? Strange calls, correspondence, visitors? William feigned surprise. No, nothing of the sort. Why do you inquire? Merely exploring possibilities. Sometimes, new developments emerge in long-standing cases. Brown paused, his gaze unwavering. You do recall that the investigation into your wife's disappearance remains open, don't you? Naturally, I recall, William replied, striving to maintain his composure. But what conceivable changes could have occurred after a decade? Brown shrugged. Unexpected events transpire. Individuals begin to speak. New witnesses surface. New evidence comes to light. He fixed William with a piercing stare. Bodies are being unearthed. William's heart lurched. What do you mean, that you've discovered Jasmine's remains? No, Brown corrected, shaking his head. Not yet, but the search continues. And let me assure you, Mr. Jones, we will not cease our efforts. And you know what, Mr. Jones? We will find her body. This case is far from closed. The detective's words hung in the air, heavy with a chilling threat. The game was afoot. The carefully constructed illusion of normalcy was crumbling, and the terrifying truth was about to surface. The impossible was no longer a question, it was a certainty. And William knew, with a chilling certainty, that he was about to pay the ultimate price for his actions. The weight of his guilt pressed in on him, heavy and inescapable. He braced himself for the inevitable confrontation. There was no escape. It was all coming to an end. Mr. Jones, Brown continued, I believe the truth will eventually surface. With that, he departed. I'll see you again, Mr. Jones. Kindly convey my regards to your friend, Jasmine. As the door clicked shut, William slumped against the wall, his legs threatening to buckle beneath him. He closed his eyes, striving to regulate his breathing. Is he gone? A gasp escaped his lips. He opened his eyes. Jasmine stood at the top of the staircase, looking down at him. Where were you? He asked, his voice strained. Upstairs, she replied. I heard the doorbell and deemed it prudent to remain unseen. She wouldn't wish to attract attention. Why? Jasmine began to descend the stairs, approaching him. Because I perceive that something is amiss, William. Your behavior is erratic. You claim I am deceased. And now, the police. She met his gaze directly. What is occurring? William avoided her eyes. Nothing significant. It was a routine check, as he stated. Are you certain? Concern tinged her voice. Her eyes, usually filled with warmth and affection, held a note of anxiety, a subtle shift that sent a fresh jolt of dread through him. The comfortable familiarity had vanished, replaced by a palpable sense of unease. He knew he couldn't maintain this charade forever. He had to find a way to unravel the mystery, to understand the impossible reality that surrounded him. But the question remained, where did he even start? The weight of it all pressed in on him, suffocating, unbearable. He had to find a solution, and he had to find it quickly. His sanity was hanging by a thread. His life hung in the balance. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that he was in grave danger. But what kind of danger? And what was the truth behind Jasmine's return? Because it appeared to me that he sought me, Jasmine clarified, her voice low. William was speechless, adrift in a sea of confusion. If this was truly Jasmine, how had she survived? And if not, who was this woman, and why did she assume the identity of his deceased wife? I'm weary, he finally said. Let's retire. Jasmine nodded, yet a shadow of concern lingered in her eyes. As night fell, sleep evaded William. He lay beside Jasmine, listening to her rhythmic breathing, attempting to differentiate reality from hallucination. He was certain he had ended Jasmine's life, yet equally certain that she lay beside him, warm and alive. Carefully, he avoided waking her, rising from the bed and descending to his study. He switched on his computer, accessing a hidden folder untouched for years, a folder containing photographs of Jasmine, the real Jasmine, before her disappearance. He began the painstaking task of comparing those images to the woman sleeping upstairs. Each detail, each subtle nuance, held a significance that could unravel the terrifying mystery surrounding him. The weight of his actions and the chilling possibility of an alternate reality pressed down on him. He needed answers. He needed to solve the puzzle before it consumed him completely. The silence of the room was heavy, broken only by the hum of the computer. He searched for a discrepancy, a single point of difference that could shatter the impossible reality. But he found none. Identical facial features, the same eyes, even a mole on her neck in precisely the same location, a perfect replica, or the original? What if I never killed her? What if it was all a delusion, an obsessive fantasy born from guilt over our arguments and my abuse? What if Jasmine simply left for a time and has now returned? No, the memory of burying her body was too vivid, too visceral to be dismissed as fantasy. William sighed, closing the folder. He picked up his phone, opening the photo gallery. The recent images of Jasmine were still present, sharp and clear. Yet, he distinctly recalled seeing only blurred anomalies this morning. He decided to test his memory. He took a new photograph of his computer screen, displaying the old image of Jasmine, emailing it to himself before deleting it from his phone. I'll examine this in the morning, he mused. If the email retains the original image, then there's no malfunction with my phone or memory. The following morning, William awoke to the aroma of breakfast. Jasmine was already preparing their meal. The unsettling routine continued, the impossible reality persisted. He had to find a way to solve this mystery, to untangle this nightmare before it consumed him. He knew he couldn't ignore what he'd seen. He needed definitive answers, and he would find them. The weight of his uncertainty pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. The breakfast felt heavy in his stomach, every bite was an effort. He had to find a way to determine what was real and what wasn't. The weight of the impossible was almost too much to bear. He needed to escape this madness. She smiled as he entered the kitchen. You appear more rested, she remarked. Sleep must have been restorative. William nodded, remaining silent. He sat, retrieving his phone. He accessed his email, the message containing the photograph was present. He clicked on the attachment. The image displayed was not the computer screen with the old photograph of Jasmine, but a blurred anomaly. The blood drained from William's face. He distinctly recalled taking that photograph. How could it have been altered? Is something amiss? Jasmine inquired, placing a plate of food before him. No, he replied, concealing his phone. All is well. She seated herself opposite him, her gaze steady. "William, I believe we must discuss yesterday's events, the detective's visit and what you told him about me." William swallowed hard. "What precisely did I say?" "You referred to me as your girlfriend, not your wife." "Why?" William was speechless. The simple word, girlfriend, held a significance far beyond its literal meaning. It was a crack in the impossible reality, a subtle shift that pointed towards a terrifying truth he had been desperately trying to ignore. His carefully constructed world, built on a foundation of lies and guilt, was about to crumble. He knew he had to find an answer, a way to explain the unexplainable, but the reality of his situation felt increasingly impossible to face. He had to tread carefully. One wrong move and everything would fall apart. The weight of his actions, and the horrifying implications of the truth were far more than he could bear. He had to think, he had to plan his next move. I didn't wish to involve you in any difficulty," he finally stammered. "What difficulty, William?" Tension laced her voice. "What is transpiring? Why are the authorities interested in me?" William pushed his plate aside, his appetite vanished. "It's difficult to explain." "Attempt it," she insisted, her gaze unwavering. At that precise moment, the doorbell rang. William breathed a sigh of relief. Respite, at least for the present. "I'll answer it," he announced, rising from his chair. A courier stood on the doorstep, a package in hand. "Delivery for William Jones," the young man stated, presenting a small box and a clipboard for William's signature. William signed, accepting the package. He recalled ordering nothing, yet he was grateful for the distraction from his increasingly untenable conversation with Jasmine. The interruption offered a brief reprieve from the impossible situation, a chance to collect his thoughts and formulate a plan. He carefully placed the package on the table, his mind racing. He needed to think clearly. The weight of the unresolved questions was almost unbearable. The impossible reality was closing in on him. What he needed to do now was buy himself some time, a way to escape this suffocating nightmare, if only for a little while. He wasn't sure how he was going to achieve this, but he knew he had to try. His life depended on it. Upon returning to the kitchen, he found it empty. "Jasmine," he called out, his voice echoing through the silent house. "Where are you?" Silence was his only response. William searched every room, but she had vanished, as if she'd dissolved into thin air the moment the courier had arrived. He sank onto the sofa, the unopened package resting in his hands. Something is profoundly wrong. People don't simply disappear without a trace. People don't materialize 10 years after their demise. He resolved to gather concrete evidence. He activated his phone, recording a video message, his gaze fixed on the camera. Today's date is March 29, 2025. 3 days ago, a woman appeared at my doorstep, claiming to be my wife, Jasmine. This is impossible, my wife died a decade ago. I'm unsure of this woman's identity or intentions, but she bears an uncanny resemblance to Jasmine and possesses knowledge only Jasmine could have. I'm documenting this to confirm my sanity. I'm not losing my mind. This is real." He paused, his eyes searching the camera lens, trying to convince himself as much as the unseen future viewer. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. He needed to record everything, preserve every detail, if only to confirm his sanity. He had to protect himself. He had to find an explanation for this impossible reality. He felt a chilling certainty, there was a deeper mystery here, and he was determined to find the answer. He had to solve this, even if it meant facing the most frightening truth imaginable. He knew this was important. He had to preserve the evidence, no matter what. He had to document everything. It was essential. It was critical. It was a matter of survival. Should anything befall me, it will be due to her. He saved the video, emailing a copy and transferring it to his computer. He would monitor for any alterations, mirroring the changes observed in the photographs. William remained unaware that, at that very moment, Kate was observing him through a hidden camera installed in his study. She smiled, her gaze fixed on his laptop screen in her temporary sanctuary, a secret room in the attic, a space William was completely oblivious to. It was a room Kate had discovered and prepared a month prior to her appearance, gaining access while William was at work. But the smile wasn't Kate's, it was Jasmine's. Even in private, Kate remained fully immersed in her friend's persona. Years of meticulous preparation had blurred the lines between herself and Jasmine, to the point where, at times, even Kate couldn't tell them apart. "Your apprehension is growing, William," she whispered, her voice laced with a chilling amusement. "That's excellent. Precisely as planned." The manipulation had begun. The pieces were falling into place, all as she had meticulously planned, all proceeding as scheduled. She watched him, a predator observing its prey. The game was far from over. It was only just beginning. And she, Kate, playing the part of Jasmine, was well prepared for everything he was going to do. "Excellent," she murmured, activating the remote access program she'd surreptitiously installed on William's computer the previous week. She quickly located the recently uploaded video, creating a copy for herself before opening the video editing software. Years of meticulous preparation had honed her skills. She'd dedicated herself to mastering computer programming, video editing, even the fundamentals of hacking, all for a single purpose: to force William Jones to confess to Jasmine's murder. Jasmine, who had saved her life in a dark alley when they were 16. Jasmine, who had bravely distracted the attacker, affording Kate the chance to escape. Jasmine, who had returned to Kate's life after months of rehabilitation, her body scarred but her spirit unbroken. And William Jones had stolen her, murdered her, and believed he'd evaded justice. But Kate would not permit that. She would secure his confession, regardless of the cost. With practiced efficiency, she manipulated the video, introducing blurriness and distorting the audio. The result would be a seemingly corrupted recording, unintelligible and unusable as evidence. She watched the altered video, satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. The plan was proceeding perfectly. She would manipulate his guilt, his paranoia, into forcing a confession, all perfectly orchestrated. It had all been so meticulously laid out, every detail planned, every contingency accounted for. She would not fail. This was her chance to finally extract vengeance for the murder of her best friend. This was personal. This was about making sure he would not escape justice. He would confess. He would pay. The process was proceeding exactly as she had anticipated. Everything was perfectly in place. Saving her edits, she uploaded the altered video back to William's computer, replacing the original. Leaning back, she gazed at the photograph of Jasmine on her makeshift desk. "I'm nearing the culmination," she whispered, tracing the image with her fingers. "It's about to fracture. I sense it." On the 7th day of Jasmine's presence, William Jones stood on the precipice of madness. Each time he checked his video message, the degradation worsened, the image blurred, the audio distorted. It was as if some unseen force was systematically erasing evidence of his sanity. He awoke to the aroma of coffee. Jasmine stood at the bedroom window, 2 steaming mugs in her hands. "Good morning," she greeted him, her smile the same one he'd remembered for a decade. "I anticipated you might require coffee." William sat up, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. Sleep had evaded him, his predicament had consumed his thoughts. What if this is all part of a larger scheme? The seemingly ordinary actions of his life felt menacing, laden with a sinister foreboding. The impossible reality felt as if it were tightening around him, crushing him under the weight of uncertainty. His mind was racing. He needed a way out. He had to find a solution. He had to solve this. The weight of the unanswered questions felt suffocating. He needed to plan. He had to think. He had to act. He knew, deep down, that he had to do something before it was too late. He knew this was his last chance to take control. And he would. What if someone is deliberately attempting to destabilize my sanity? "Thank you," he replied, accepting the mug. "Unable to sleep?" Jasmine inquired, settling beside him. I've been plagued by nightmares, she confessed softly. William took a sip of coffee, unsure how to respond. Regarding what? He finally asked. Jasmine turned towards the window. Concerning graves, she stated simply. Concerning individuals who believe they can bury their problems deep within the earth. But the deceased don't always remain interred, William. Sometimes, they return. Her words sent a shiver down his spine. It was a direct, unmistakable clue. What do you mean? He asked, striving to maintain his composure. Nothing of consequence, she replied, a faint smile playing on her lips. Merely contemplating aloud. She rose, heading towards the door. I shall prepare breakfast. Join me when you're ready. As she left, William remained seated, his gaze fixed on the closed door. Something in her words had instilled a profound fear, a sense that she possessed knowledge, that she could see through his lies, his crime. The casual conversation was chillingly menacing. This wasn't just a woman who had inexplicably returned from the grave, this was a predator toying with its prey. At breakfast, Jasmine was unusually reticent, her silence heavy with unspoken implications. The ordinary act of eating felt menacing. The impossible reality felt as if it were tightening around him, crushing him under the weight of uncertainty. He knew something was coming, something big. He just wasn't sure what. He had to prepare. He had to be ready. He had to think. He had to plan. The weight of the unanswered questions was almost unbearable. He had to solve this. He had to. He knew he wasn't alone in this house. And he knew that the game had only just begun. She moved through the kitchen with her usual grace, yet her silence carried an unspoken accusation. I'll likely be late for work today, William announced, breaking the silence. It's a crucial meeting. Certainly, she replied, nodding. I believe I shall visit the cemetery, I have acquaintances there. William froze, his fork suspended midair. The cemetery? Yes, it has been some time. I should lay flowers. The grave William was contemplating, an unmarked plot in a desolate area beyond the city limits, was not documented on any map. Only he knew of its existence. Very well, he managed, his mouth suddenly dry. I'll meet you this evening. The entire workday was a blur. Jasmine's words about the cemetery echoed in his mind. Asterisk, does she know? Is this all part of a scheme to expose my crime? Asterisk. At 5 o'clock, he cancelled his remaining appointments, heading to his car. He needed certainty. He had to know. He had to act. The uncertainty was unbearable. He had to find a way to resolve this. He had to solve this impossible situation. He had to figure this out before he lost his mind. He had to confront this reality. He couldn't continue to live this way. He had to do something. He had to find the truth, no matter what the cost. He was driving with grim determination, his mind racing with 100 different possibilities. The weight of it all pressed down on him. He had to find a way to resolve this. He had to. The trip to the cemetery felt momentous, an important step towards the resolution of the impossible. The line between reality and hallucination felt increasingly blurred. He needed to find a way to regain control. He had to. This was it. The moment of truth. He needed visual confirmation that Jasmine's grave remained undisturbed, that her remains were still interred deep within the earth. The burial site was an hour's drive from the city, an abandoned lot intended for development, a project that had never commenced. 10 years prior, it had been barren earth, now, trees, shrubs, and tall grass had overtaken the land. William parked, navigating through the dense undergrowth, attempting to pinpoint the precise location. It proved challenging, the landscape had undergone significant transformation. He oriented himself using an old oak tree as a landmark. The grave should be 50 paces east of the tree. He began counting his steps, his gaze sweeping across the terrain. His heart pounded a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Asterisk, what if someone had disturbed the grave? What if remains had been discovered? 48, 49, 50. William halted, his eyes searching the ground. The area appeared untouched, tall grass, small bushes, no signs of excavation. A sigh of relief escaped his lips. It appeared undisturbed. The relief was immense, but it was temporary. He knew this wasn't over. The impossible reality of Jasmine's presence was still unresolved. This was only a small victory in a much larger battle. The weight of the unanswered questions pressed down on him. He had to continue to seek answers. He needed to solve this. He had to. This was just the beginning. He turned away from the grave, his mind already racing towards his next move. He had to find a solution, and he would. He wouldn't rest until he had. He turned towards his car, preparing for whatever might come next, steeling himself for the inevitable. Jasmine's remains were still present. Then, a chilling realization struck him. If Jasmine's body is here, then who is the woman in my house? Who is this individual who perfectly mimics my wife, who possesses intimate knowledge of her habits, her past, her very essence, the visions, the hallucinations? None of it was logically possible. A hallucination couldn't be touched, couldn't be heard ascending the stairs, couldn't impart the warmth of a physical body in bed. This woman was undeniably real, yet she couldn't be Jasmine. Jasmine had been lying beneath the soil and grass for a decade. William returned home late that night, exhausted and utterly disoriented. The house was plunged in darkness, silent and empty. "Jasmine," he called, switching on a light. No response. He searched the kitchen, the living room, then ascended the stairs. There was no sign of the woman who'd claimed to be his wife. Perhaps she had departed. Perhaps this ordeal was finally over. The relief was immediate, but it was short-lived. He knew this wasn't over. The questions remained. The impossible still loomed large. He had to find an explanation. He needed to discover the truth. He had to find the answers before it was too late. He knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The weight of the mystery pressed down on him, heavy and oppressive. He was sure that he wasn't alone in this. Something else was coming. And he had to be prepared. The game had only just begun. The realization brought a simultaneous wave of relief and a peculiar sense of longing. He poured himself a whiskey, settling into his chair before the fireplace, a familiar ritual that usually provided solace. But not tonight. Tonight, he felt a looming threat, something inescapable and terrifying. Visited the grave? The sound of Jasmine's voice shattered the fragile calm. William shuddered, nearly spilling his drink. She stood in the doorway, a chilling smile on her lips. "What are you referring to?" he demanded, the blood draining from his face. "The grave, William," she repeated, advancing towards him. "The one you prepared for me a decade ago, beyond the old oak tree." William's heart pounded against his ribs. "I don't comprehend your meaning," he replied, rising from his chair. "Come now, William," she said, her voice deceptively calm, yet her eyes burned with an intense fire. "No more fabrications. I'm aware of your actions. I know how you strangled me. I know how you concealed my body in a rug. I know how you transported and interred me." She closed the distance, and William stumbled backward, colliding with his chair. The casualness of her words masked a chilling threat. The impossible was real. She knew everything. He had been exposed. The game was over. He was trapped. The weight of his actions pressed in on him, heavy and suffocating. He had nowhere to run. There was nowhere to hide. He had been found out. And now, he had to pay the price. His life was over. "Who are you?" he breathed, his voice barely audible. "I am your conscience, William," she replied, her smile widening. "Your past, returned to collect its due." William shook his head, struggling to regain his composure. "That's impossible. I was at the burial site today. The grave is undisturbed. The remains are still there. Oh, William, she said, her smile broadening. Do you truly believe that I am the one entombed? That I've risen from the grave to seek retribution? If not, then who are you? He demanded, anger replacing his fear. Who the hell are you? She stepped back, performing a bizarre action. She ran a hand across her face, as if removing a mask. Of course, nothing altered, she still resembled Jasmine perfectly. Don't you recognize her? She asked, her voice laced with chilling amusement. Consider carefully, William. Who possesses intimate knowledge of Jasmine's life? Who could perfectly mimic her appearance with the assistance of a skilled surgeon? Who harbors sufficient animosity towards you to dedicate a decade to exacting revenge? Then, it struck him. Kate, he whispered, the world tilting on its axis. The impossible had become terrifyingly clear. The woman before him wasn't Jasmine's ghost or a figment of his guilt-ridden imagination. This was a calculated, meticulously planned act of revenge. And it had been orchestrated by someone who knew him, someone who knew Jasmine, someone who had the skills and the resources to carry out such a complex deception. This wasn't supernatural, this was far more terrifying. This was a human being seeking vengeance. And he was completely defenseless. The truth was worse than any nightmare. The game was over. The game had been won. And he had lost. He had lost everything. This wasn't a ghost, it was Kate. And she had been playing him from the very beginning. The realization hit him with the full force of a physical blow, and he sank to his knees, completely overwhelmed by the enormity of what had just happened. The truth was far more terrifying than anything he had ever imagined. Kate Wilson, he whispered, the name a confirmation of the impossible. She clapped her hands slowly, a chillingly deliberate gesture. Correct, William. Your cognitive functions are finally operating. William sank into the chair, unable to remain standing. Kate Wilson, Jasmine's closest friend, the woman who had vanished from the town shortly after Jasmine's disappearance. But why? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Why all of this? Why? Her voice trembled with barely controlled emotion. You murdered the only person I ever truly cherished. The only individual who ever sacrificed herself for me. She moved closer, and William saw in her eyes not Jasmine, but a different person entirely, someone consumed by rage and profound pain. Are you aware of what transpired when we were adolescents? Did Jasmine mention it? William shook his head. We were 16, Kate said, her gaze distant, lost in the memories. We were returning home late one night, taking a shortcut through an alley. We were attacked by a man, a local assailant who had already assaulted and murdered 2 women. She paused, gathering her strength. He seized both of us. He wielded a knife. Escape seemed impossible. And then Jasmine shoved me, screaming, "Run!" The intensity of the memory was almost palpable, the raw emotion in Kate's voice underscored the depth of her trauma, the profound loss she carried within her. The casual conversation had been replaced by a chilling narrative of survival, betrayal, and revenge. The years of preparation had been fueled by grief and a burning desire for justice. William had been played. Manipulated. And now, he would pay. Get help. Kate's voice cracked. She remained there alone, enabling my escape. Kate turned away, her shoulders shaking. I fled, but there was no one, no assistance. By the time I returned with law enforcement, it was too late. She faced him, tears streaming down her cheeks. He held her captive for 3 days in the basement of an abandoned building. 3 days, William. Can you fathom what that signifies in the hands of a psychopath? He beat her, stabbed her, raped her, fractured her bones, burned her with cigarettes. Every inch of her body was marred by bruises, lacerations, burns. Kate moved closer, looming over him. Do you know what he testified in court? That he sought retribution for 2 victims. That he was disappointed one of us had escaped. So he tortured Jasmine twice as much, for both of us. William sat, stunned by the narrative. Jasmine had never disclosed this, she'd never mentioned enduring such a horrific ordeal. She survived, Kate continued, her voice filled with awe and sorrow. She endured 6 months of hospitalization, a year of therapy. The intensity of the story, the raw emotion in Kate's voice, was unbearable. The casual conversation had been replaced by a chilling narrative of survival, betrayal, and revenge. The years of preparation had been fueled by grief and a burning desire for justice. The carefully constructed illusion of normalcy was gone, replaced by a stark and terrifying reality. William had been played. Manipulated. And now, he would pay. The impossible had become terrifyingly clear. This wasn't some supernatural event, this was a meticulously planned act of revenge. And he was completely defenseless. The game was over. He had lost. He had lost everything. The weight of it all pressed down on him, suffocating and inescapable. He had to face the reality of his actions. He had to accept the consequences. He had to pay. He knew this was coming. But he hadn't expected it to be this way. This was far worse than any nightmare. This was real. This was justice. And he was completely helpless. Do you know what she said when I inquired how she endured that horrific ordeal? She replied, I focused on you, knowing you were safe, unaffected. Kate brushed away a tear, composing herself. And then you appeared, and everything seemed fine, initially. She loved you, trusted you, and then you began to strike her. William flinched. No one, except himself and Jasmine, knew of his violence. She called me, weeping. I implored her to leave you, but she kept postponing it. And then, she simply vanished. And you informed the authorities that you were unaware of her whereabouts. That she might have left voluntarily. Kate clenched her fists. But I knew you had harmed her. Detective Brown suspected as well, but there was insufficient evidence. And you escaped accountability. She approached the fireplace, picking up a framed photograph, an old picture of William and Jasmine. I vowed to extract a confession, to make you pay for your actions, and here I am. William stared, disbelief etched on his face. The casual conversation had been replaced by a chilling narrative of betrayal, revenge, and the inescapable weight of the past. The meticulously crafted illusion of normalcy had been shattered, replaced by a stark and terrifying reality. He had been manipulated, played, and now, he would pay the price for his actions. The truth was out. The game was over. He had been defeated. The horror of it all pressed in on him, suffocating and inescapable. He had nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide. There was no escape from the consequences of his actions. The weight of his guilt was unbearable. He had been exposed. And now, he would pay. The carefully constructed illusion of normalcy was crumbling. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. The truth was out. And now, he would pay. The price would be steep. It always was. How had she undergone such a transformation? How had she become an exact replica of Jasmine? 10 reconstructive surgeries, Kate replied, as if reading his thoughts. 10 years of meticulous preparation. I studied every facet of her appearance, every habit, every memory she shared with me. I became her, William, for you. She returned the photograph to its place. And it succeeded. You believed. You began to doubt your sanity, your memories, the very fabric of your reality. William remained speechless. All this for revenge? For justice, Kate corrected. Jasmine saved me twice, first in that alley, and then when she restored my faith in humanity after the ordeal. And I couldn't safeguard her from you. William shook his head. You're insane, he declared. You devoted 10 years, altering your appearance, sacrificing your life, for what? For a man who's deceased? Kate smiled. It wasn't Jasmine's smile. It was the cold, calculating smile of someone who had patiently awaited their moment. Not for a deceased man, William. For Jasmine. The finality of her words hung heavy in the air. The carefully constructed illusion of normalcy had been shattered, the impossible had become a terrifying reality. The meticulous plan, years in the making, had reached its culmination. The game was over. And William had lost. He had lost everything. The years of manipulation, the carefully constructed deception, had all been part of a larger plan. And now, the truth was out. He had been played. He had been manipulated. And he was completely defenseless. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. The game was over. He had lost everything. There was no escape. The truth had been revealed. And the price would be paid. It always was. For the truth. For your acknowledgement of your actions, so you won't evade accountability. She produced a small device, pressing a button. And, you know what? It worked. William's voice echoed through the room. If Jasmine's body is here, then who is the woman in my house? His own voice, recorded earlier that day at the burial site. What is that? He whispered. Evidence, Kate replied. The first of many. I've recorded every conversation we've shared, every word you've uttered since my arrival. She took a step back. But I desire a complete confession, William. I need to hear you admit to Jasmine's murder. William stood, rage simmering within him. You'll achieve nothing, he stated. No recording will suffice. It will still be your word against mine. You're mistaken, Kate countered. I have a witness. Someone who always believed in your guilt. As if summoned, the living room door opened. The carefully constructed illusion of normalcy had been shattered, the impossible had become a terrifying reality. The meticulously planned act of revenge had reached its culmination. The game was over. And William had lost. He had lost everything. The years of manipulation, the carefully constructed deception, had all been part of a larger plan. And now, the truth was out. He had been played. He had been manipulated. And he was completely defenseless. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. The game was over. He had lost everything. There was no escape. The truth had been revealed. And now, he would pay. The price would be steep. It always was. The arrival of the witness signaled the beginning of the end. His carefully constructed world was about to crumble. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. He was trapped. He was defeated. He was finished. Detective Tom Brown stood on the doorstep. Good evening, Mr. Jones, he stated, his voice laced with the same disdain William remembered from their previous encounters. It appears we've finally secured some evidence. William felt the world tilt on its axis. His gaze shifted from the detective to the woman who resembled his deceased wife. You collaborated, he accused. This entire time? Not the entirety, Brown corrected, shaking his head. Kate contacted me a month ago, outlining her plan. I couldn't disregard such an opportunity. William sank into his chair, realizing he was trapped. What transpires now? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Kate addressed him. You will recount the truth, the complete truth, regarding Jasmine's demise, or we continue this game. I can vanish and reappear indefinitely, William. I can destabilize your sanity for months, even years. William looked at her, a woman bearing his wife's features, yet her eyes reflected a different person's rage and sorrow. A strange sense of relief washed over him. The impossible was ending, the weight of his actions, the years of guilt, the terrifying manipulation, were about to reach their conclusion. The elaborate deception was nearing its end, the meticulously planned revenge was about to culminate. He knew he had to confess, he had to accept the consequences of his actions. There was no escape. The game was over. He had lost. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that the price he was about to pay would be steep. He closed his eyes, bracing himself for the inevitable. It was over. It was finally over. The impossible was ending. He braced himself for the consequences. The game had been played, and now, the reckoning had arrived. The truth would finally be revealed. And justice would be served. Perhaps it was time for a confession. Time to end this torment. "I killed her," he whispered. Louder, Kate demanded. "I require clarity." "I killed Jasmine," William repeated, his voice stronger. "We argued. She announced her departure. She was initiating divorce proceedings. I couldn't permit that. I seized her by the throat, strangling her until she ceased to move." His head bowed, tears streaming down his face. "I concealed her body in a rug, transporting her beyond the city limits, interring her 50 paces east of the old oak tree." Kate remained motionless, her gaze fixed on him. Tears flowed freely down her cheeks, yet she made no attempt to wipe them away. "Did you hear that?" she asked, turning to Brown. "Every word," the detective confirmed, producing his handcuffs. "William Jones, you're under arrest for the murder of Jasmine Jones. You have the right to remain silent." William barely registered the words. His gaze remained locked on the woman who bore his wife's features, a complex mixture of emotions swirling within him: relief, remorse, terror, and a profound sense of loss. The impossible was over, the game had ended. The meticulously planned act of revenge had reached its conclusion. The truth had been revealed, the confession extracted. Justice would be served. The weight of his actions, the years of guilt, the terrifying manipulation, had all reached their culmination. The elaborate deception was over. The impossible reality was fading. He had been played, manipulated, and now, he would pay the price. But a profound sense of relief washed over him, the torment was finally ending. The nightmare was over. The truth was out. And now, he would face the consequences. The game was over. He had lost everything. But in a strange way, it was also a kind of victory. The truth had been revealed. And now, he could finally begin the process of finding peace. The nightmare was over. And he could finally start to heal. The woman who had dedicated a decade to avenging her friend, who had altered her appearance, her identity, her life for this single moment. Was it worthwhile? He asked as Brown secured the handcuffs. These 10 years, the surgeries, all that suffering? Kate studied him for a long moment. "I'm uncertain," she admitted honestly. "But I know I couldn't have acted differently. Jasmine deserved justice, and she has received it." As Brown escorted William from the house, Kate remained in the living room. 10 years of preparation, 10 years of transformation, 10 years of unwavering obsession. It had all concluded within a single evening. She approached the mirror, gazing at her reflection, a face that no longer belonged to her, the face of the woman who had once instilled such terror. What remains for the Avenger once vengeance is achieved? Where does a ghost retreat when its task is completed? Kate touched her face, a stranger's face, with her fingertips. The impossible was over, the meticulously planned act of revenge had reached its culmination. The years of manipulation, the carefully constructed deception, had all been part of a larger plan. And now, the truth was out. She had succeeded. She had avenged her friend. But at what cost? The question hung heavy in the air, unanswered, unresolved. The victory felt hollow, the relief fleeting. What now? The impossible was over. But the reality that remained was far more complicated than she had ever imagined. The future was uncertain. The game was over. But what would she do now? The question hung heavy in the air, unanswered, unresolved. The victory was hollow. The relief was fleeting. What now? The emptiness was vast. The silence deafening. The years of preparation, of planning, of sacrifice, all of it culminated in this moment. And the only thing that remained was the emptiness. The silence. The void. The crushing reality that it was all over. And there was nothing left. Each scar beneath the flawless skin, each meticulously reconstructed bone, served as a monument to her obsession. She hadn't merely impersonated Jasmine, she had become her, and that was her curse. I avenged you, she whispered to her reflection. But in doing so, I lost myself. She stepped away from the mirror, resolutely removing the locket containing a photograph of young Jasmine, her talisman for all those years, placing it on the table, studying it one last time. Justice had been served, yet there was no release. A sudden thought stilled her. She slowly returned to the mirror, examining her reflection. In that face, she saw her future, the only conceivable future. The following morning, she entered the police station. Detective Brown awaited her in his office. As she sat opposite him, his expression revealed a complex blend of admiration and apprehension. So, he began, studying her intently. What transpires now? Now, she replied calmly, Jasmine Jones wishes to reclaim her identity. The impossible was over. The game had reached its conclusion. The meticulous plan, years in the making, had reached its culmination. The years of preparation, of transformation, of sacrifice, all of it culminated in this moment. And now, a new chapter began. The carefully constructed deception had served its purpose, revenge had been exacted. But the future was uncertain. She had to start a new life, a life free from the obsession that had consumed her for so long. She had to find a way to move on. She had to find a way to forgive herself. She had to find a way to live. The impossible was over. But the future was still uncertain. The next chapter would be difficult. But she would face it with the same determination and resilience she had shown over the past decade. She would build a new life, a new identity, free from the burden of her past. She would find peace. She would find happiness. She would find herself again. The game was over. But the future was still unwritten. And she would make it her own. Jasmine has been reported missing, hasn't she? Not deceased, merely missing. The detective leaned back, his gaze fixed on her. Kate, he began softly. Do you understand that you were Jasmine? She interrupted firmly. My name is Jasmine Jones. Kate Wilson disappeared a week ago on a remote highway. And I have returned home. A long silence stretched between them, the woman with the borrowed face and the detective who possessed the truth. Are you certain? He finally asked. Absolutely, she replied, her conviction unwavering. Kate had sacrificed everything for justice. Now, it's my turn to live. The detective nodded slowly, acknowledging the irreversible nature of her decision. They both understood there was no turning back. The mask had become the face, the role had become the essence, and perhaps that was the only path to peace for the ghost of vengeance. He slid the application form across the desk. Welcome home, Jasmine. The impossible was over. The game had reached its conclusion. The meticulously planned act of revenge had reached its culmination. The years of preparation, of transformation, of sacrifice, all of it culminated in this moment. And now, a new chapter began. The carefully constructed deception had served its purpose, revenge had been exacted. But the future was uncertain. She had to start a new life, a life free from the obsession that had consumed her for so long. She had to find a way to move on. She had to find a way to forgive herself. She had to find a way to live. The impossible was over. But the future was still unwritten. And she would make it her own. The game was over. But a new life was beginning. And she would embrace it. She would create her own future. The future that was waiting for her. And she would embrace it. She would live. She would find peace. She would find happiness. She would become herself again. The game was over. But the future was still unwritten. And she would make it her own.